Picture yourself settling into a cozy seat, ready for a cinematic story that merges Hollywood glamour with heroic determination, quiet humility, and a dash of small-town warmth. Today we're peeling back the curtain on one of Tinseltown's most beloved legends, James Maitland Jimmy Stewart. Far more than just an iconic actor with a signature drawl, he was a man whose life stretched far beyond the silver screen, through the clouds in a B-24 bomber and into the heart of battle over war-torn Europe, then on to family tragedies and personal triumphs. This is the story of a gentle soul from a little Pennsylvania town who once dreamed of flight, discovered stardom almost by accident, and left an indelible mark on both Hollywood and the United States Air Force. So buckle up. We're about to take a high-altitude journey into a life layered with enough drama, devotion, and depth to fill every reel in the studio vault. Jimmy Stewart was born on May 20th, 1908 in Indiana, Pennsylvania. There's no red carpet in a place like Indiana, just a main street that might see a handful of cars roll by in an hour and a few unhurried pedestrians swinging by the local hardware store. That particular hardware store, J.M. Stewart and Company, belonged to his family. His father, Alexander Maitland Stewart, was as no-nonsense as they come, a man shaped by his own experiences serving in the Spanish-American War and World War I. Some families pass down heirlooms or certain physical features. The Stewarts, however, passed down a tradition of military service that reached back to both grandfathers in the Civil War. This was a clan whose stories of duty and valor were woven into every family meal and every quiet evening reading the newspaper in the parlor. Small-town life left its mark on young Jimmy. A strict Presbyterian upbringing meant Sunday morning church was never optional, and respect for elders was non-negotiable. He was a shy kid. Think of him as the type who'd rather sit in the corner listening to the grown-ups chat than take center stage. Yet underneath that reserve, there was a spark, something that would lead him into the sky long before it led him to the stage. By the time Jimmy was 11, he had his first taste of flying, catching a ride with a barnstorming pilot. Barnstormers were the daredevils of the day, traveling from town to town, performing gravity-defying stunts, and offering rides to curious locals. For Jimmy, that first adventure in the cockpit was a revelation, and it changed him in ways he might not have fully realized at the time. After World War I, aviation was still a novelty. Pilots were pioneers navigating the wind and sky, half explorers, half showmen. He began collecting newspaper clippings about Charles Lindbergh's 1927 flight across the Atlantic, and dreamed about what it might be like to take to the clouds whenever he pleased. It wasn't all about planes for Jimmy, though. His father preferred a more grounded path, suggesting college over a military academy for his bright son. Jimmy ended up at Princeton University studying architecture, a field that satisfied his father's hope for a respectable profession. While there, he also took a brief dip into the Army ROTC, a kind of wink at the family's tradition. But his real calling started to materialize in a very different department, the Triangle Club. Picture a group of energetic undergrads putting on musicals and comedic skits, indulging in a creative streak that was often at odds with the stern atmosphere of an Ivy League campus. Suddenly, Jimmy discovered that his quiet personality could light up on stage. Audiences loved him. He had a natural earnestness, a sincerity that pulled people in. He wasn't a showboat, but something about his awkward grace, his tall and lanky frame, and that gentle voice just made people melt. At the same time, while classmates were mapping out their future business careers or planning to become big-shot lawyers, Jimmy's mind still wandered to aviation. He tinkered with model airplanes, kept reading about flight engineering, and wondered if there might be a way to combine his newfound love for performing with his old obsession for the skies. After graduating in 1932, he headed for New York, hoping to make it on the stage. The real world in the early 1930s was no picnic. America was wallowing in the Great Depression, jobs were scarce, and anyone with a secure, well-paying position was considered lucky. Yet somehow, this tall young man, who exuded an almost bashful warmth, found his footing in theater, building up the kind of resume that eventually caught Hollywood's eye. By the mid-1930s, he was in Los Angeles under contract with MGM, one of the biggest, glitziest studios of the Golden Age. Imagine a wide-eyed kid from Indiana stepping onto elaborate backlots that recreated entire city streets or foreign locales, all humming with activity. Directors shouted, crew members bustled about, and starlets lounged in makeup chairs. But Jimmy didn't lose himself in the glare of spotlights. He retained that small-town humility, which is precisely what made him stand out among more polished or showy contemporaries. He played the everyman in a raft of films, a persona that resonated with depression-weary audiences who wanted to see a bit of themselves on screen. Yet in the midst of that Hollywood dream, Jimmy still had his eye on the horizon. By 1935, at a time when his film career was picking up steam, he quietly earned his private pilot's license. This wasn't just a casual interest. He put real hours in, purchasing a Stinson 105 airplane and building up flight time whenever his shooting schedule allowed. As the 1930s slid toward the 1940s, a darker tide began to rise in Europe and Asia. War clouds gathered, and eventually the United States instituted a draft in 1940. Jimmy Stewart, at 6 feet 3 inches and a little over 130 pounds, barely made a dent on the scale. When he showed up for his draft physical, the Army told him he was underweight. He needed to bulk up or risk being turned away. Think about that for a moment. In an era where many celebrities dodged military service through various means, Jimmy Stewart was actually trying to gain weight so he could get in. He embarked on a high-calorie diet, worked with Hollywood trainer Don Loomis, and indeed managed to tip the scales just enough. In March 1941, he enlisted as a private in the Army Air Corps, putting his budding movie stardom on hold. Stewart was arguably the first major American movie star to enter the service before Pearl Harbor. Even the brass initially hesitated. Here was a bankable star, a household name, and they worried about the risk to morale if he got hurt or killed. But Jimmy wasn't having any of that. He wanted to serve just like anyone else, refusing preferential treatment and leaning on his civilian flight credentials to justify why the Air Corps shouldn't keep him stateside. His superiors, perhaps still cautious, assigned him early on as a flight instructor and to promotional tasks. He spent time at places like Matherfield in California and Hobbs in New Mexico, teaching younger pilots the nuances of twin-engine aircraft and the imposing B-17 Flying Fortress. He also lent his voice and recognizable face to promotional films like Winning Your Wings, 1942, which played in movie theaters across the country and reportedly helped recruit over 100,000 new Air Corps enlistees. That was a big deal. Imagine sitting in a cinema back then, watching a beloved star passionately encourage you to join the war effort. It worked like a charm. However, as bombs kept falling across Europe and the Pacific, Stewart grew restless. He didn't join just to be a figurehead. He wanted combat duty. By 1943, he finally got his wish, heading to England to fly the B-24 Liberator as part of the 445th Bombardment Group. Now try to picture it. The gentle, stammering actor from Mr. Smith goes to Washington slipping into a flight jacket, pre-flight checking a 4-engine bomber, and striding onto an airfield where engines roared and the smell of oil, sweat, and adrenaline saturated the air. It was December 1943 when he took part in his first combat mission targeting the U-boat pens in Kiel, Germany. Though he had to be nervous, you'd have to be inhuman not to be, his leadership in the cockpit was steady, earning immediate respect from his crew. The following year, Stewart's responsibilities ballooned. Promoted to major, he became the operations officer for the 453rd Bomb Group, responsible not only for flying missions, but also for coordinating the movements of entire squadrons. On March 22, 1944, he planned and led a 1,000-plane raid on Berlin. The capital of Nazi Germany was heavily defended by anti-aircraft guns and the Luftwaffe, making each mission a deadly gamble. Yet Stewart's calm was legendary. He radiated the sort of reassurance that made his men believe they had a chance of making it home. He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross and additional oak leaf clusters for his consistent bravery. You can imagine the on-base chatter. Yeah, he's a movie star back home, but here he's just another pilot, and a damn good one. He had close calls too. On a mission over France, his B-24 lost an engine, a perilous situation that sent the plane guzzling fuel at an alarming rate. Stewart had to manually adjust the fuel mixtures, tapping into all the knowledge he'd gained in civilian flight school, eventually nursing the battered bomber back to a safe landing. The margin was razor thin. His plane touched down with mere moments of flight time left before the engines would have sputtered out entirely. Tales like this circulated among the crews, solidifying his reputation. But war does more than threaten lives. It scars souls. By 1945, Stewart was a colonel who had led numerous missions over Europe, many in the deadliest theaters of the air war. The cost was brutal. One mission lost 130 men from his unit alone, a grim statistic that weighed heavily on his conscience. When he finally returned stateside, he was thinner, more solemn, prone to nightmares, a man burdened by images of flak tearing through metal and the knowledge that not everyone made it back. Today, we'd likely label it PTSD, but back then, it was something men were expected to push down and ignore. Right after the war, he signed on to star in Frank Capra's It's a Wonderful Life, 1946. Observers say some of the raw emotion in that film, especially during those harrowing breakdown scenes, wasn't acting at all. It was genuine heartbreak and anxiety pouring out of a man still haunted by what he'd seen overseas. Despite stepping back into Hollywood's spotlight, Stewart never fully left the military behind. He remained in the Air Force Reserve, attending regular training drills, mentoring younger officers, and staying current in aviation developments. Over time, as he took on roles in movies such as Strategic Air Command, 1955, audiences got a taste of how seriously he took his dual identity, part actor, part airman. In 1959, he was promoted to Brigadier General, a remarkable achievement that made him the highest-ranking Hollywood star in U.S. military history. Yet even with this prestige, the man never lost that everyday charm. He could chat with crewmen on set about their families 1 minute and then give a crisp salute to a superior officer the next. As the 1960s unfolded, America found itself entangled in the Vietnam War. By this time, Stewart was in his late 50s, still in the Air Force Reserve. Rather than sit it out in comfort, he chose to volunteer as a non-duty observer on a B-52 bombing run in 1966. Stationed briefly in Guam, he witnessed the new face of warfare: jets, guided bombs, and a conflict very different from the one he'd fought in Europe. Although he didn't see frontline combat in Vietnam, the experience gave him a sobering perspective on modern warfare and the cyclical nature of young Americans heading off to battle. In 1968, at age 60, he reached mandatory retirement from the Air Force Reserve, leaving with the Air Force Distinguished Service Medal. He walked away with the knowledge that he'd served in two vastly different eras of American military aviation, from the propeller-driven bombers of World War II to the jet-propelled B-52 Stratofortress that symbolized Cold War power. Yet the greatest, and in some ways most painful intersection of Stewart's personal and military life arrived in 1969, when his stepson Ronald, Gloria's child from a previous marriage, was killed in action in Vietnam. If you can imagine, for a man who had witnessed the loss of so many friends and comrades in World War II, this was a searing personal blow. It was another grim reminder that wars continue to demand new sacrifices from each generation, and this time it was his own family grieving. That year left him more resolute in his empathy for veterans and war widows, though typically he kept these feelings private. Who was Jimmy Stewart off-screen and off-duty? He married Gloria Haytrick McLean in 1949 when he was 41, a confirmed bachelor for a time, rumored to have dated many of Hollywood's leading ladies. But once he found Gloria, he settled into a committed home life, helping raise her two sons and eventually welcoming twin daughters, Judy and Kelly, born in 1951. It's easy to conjure up a wholesome image: Jimmy, Gloria, and the kids living in Beverly Hills, yet somehow maintaining a down-to-earth household rather than a glitzy Hollywood palace. He rarely discussed his wartime experiences, and even his kids observed the toll it had taken: nightmares, a reluctance to watch certain war movies, or even mention his medals. For him, that part of his life wasn't about glory. It was a duty performed under dire circumstances, something he honored but didn't want to romanticize. When Hollywood occasionally came knocking with proposals to dramatize his war stories on film, Stewart politely declined. This reluctance wasn't due to shame or a desire for secrecy. He simply didn't see the point in spotlighting himself or turning the brutal realities of bombing raids into spectacle. His medals and decorations, Distinguished Flying Cross with oak leaf clusters, the Air Medal with oak leaf clusters, the French Croix de Guerre with palm, and more, were often stowed away in drawers or quietly displayed out of the limelight. That humility also extended to his film sets. While some co-stars and directors might have loved to hear war stories straight from a hero's mouth, he deflected questions or offered only the barest details. After all, he was there to act, not to show off his combat credentials. When you think about the Stewart brand, those roles where he played earnest men wrestling with moral dilemmas, from Mr. Smith to George Bailey, you start to see how real life bled into these performances. For him, these characters' decency and steadfastness weren't simply theatrical illusions. They echoed his sense of duty, shaped by that long family lineage of veterans, sharpened by his experiences commanding B-24 bombers under relentless enemy fire, and sealed by the tragedies he witnessed along the way. As the decades rolled on, Stewart shifted into more elder statesman roles. While peers like Cary Grant retired early, or others like John Wayne lingered in the genre they'd come to personify, Stewart navigated a path that included lighter fare and the occasional cameo. But behind the scenes, life took its toll. His beloved Gloria passed away from lung cancer in 1994, and Stewart, never quite the same after that, drifted from public life. He refused to replace a failing pacemaker battery in 1996, a decision that perhaps reflected a readiness to accept life's final chapter without intervention. He passed away on July 2, 1997, at the age of 89, leaving behind a rich legacy that spanned nearly 9 decades of American cultural and political history. At his funeral, more than 3,000 people showed up to pay their respects, and the Air Force gave him a fitting send-off with a 3-volley salute and a missing man formation. It's a poignant picture, Even in death, he was recognized as Brigadier General Stewart, the quiet hero, as much as the Hollywood legend. Jimmy Stewart was the star of classics like The Philadelphia Story, Rear Window, and Vertigo, winning an Academy Award and multiple nominations across his career. At the same time, he was an Air Force officer who flew 20 official combat missions, and likely more if we count the ones shrouded in secrecy. He was a family man who suffered unimaginable losses, and a friend to many in the industry who admired him for his steadiness, both personally and professionally. Some rumors even suggest that, during the war, he might have been involved in clandestine missions for the OSS, the wartime forerunner to the CIA. True or not, it's a testament to the respect and mystique he commanded that people believed he was capable of such feats. He received numerous distinctions late in life, including the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1985, often considered the highest civilian honor in the United States. President Bill Clinton once called him a national treasure, a great actor, a gentleman, and a patriot. It's hard to sum him up better than that. Yet if you visit his final resting place at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California, you'll see a modest headstone inscribed simply, James M. Stewart, Brigadier General, U.S. Air Force. To modern audiences, the notion of a major celebrity risking life and limb in combat is almost unthinkable. Today's megastars might support the troops from afar, visit bases for morale-boosting appearances, or donate money to veterans' causes, but to actually serve, to regularly put themselves in the line of fire, that sense of duty speaks to a different era and a different breed of Hollywood figure. Yet even back then it was rare. Stewart wasn't alone. Other actors like Clark Gable, Henry Fonda, and Ronald Reagan also served in the military in various capacities. But Stewart stands out for his direct combat experience and his unwavering commitment to fulfilling the responsibilities of an airman no matter what. It leaves us with an image that might seem contradictory at first. A man who portrayed vulnerable, soft-spoken characters, yet was also brave enough to pilot heavy bombers into the heart of enemy territory. In reality, there's no contradiction at all. Jimmy Stewart embodied a belief that gentleness and grit can coexist, that you can be empathetic and resolute all at once. The same deep sensitivity that informed his greatest film performances likely made him an effective leader in war, aware of the human cost, but willing to do what had to be done. He carried that attitude forward, never shirking from an opportunity to serve, even if it meant leaving the glamour of Hollywood behind. And in his personal life, despite the heartbreaks and losses like his stepson in Vietnam, he didn't wave these sacrifices around or seek the public's pity. Instead, he quietly grieved and continued supporting those who served, often behind the scenes. He lived in a paradox where he was lionized on the big screen, yet yearned for the normalcy of small-town roots, humble enough to keep his achievements tucked away rather than emblazoned on a billboard. Those who worked with him near the end of his film career often describe a man who never fully left the older world behind. He would mention flying only sparingly, or revert to memories of his father's hardware store in Indiana, Pennsylvania, speaking fondly of how the squeaking wooden floors felt under his feet. Though he'd grown up, traveled the world, and commanded entire squadrons in a global conflict, part of him always stayed that small-town kid scanning the skies for barnstormers. That innocence merged with quiet determination is precisely what made him beloved on screen and respected off it. To this day, fans of Jimmy Stewart might watch It's a Wonderful Life around the holidays, or rediscover his collaborations with Alfred Hitchcock, or chuckle at his comedic timing in The Philadelphia Story. But few realize that behind that trademark stammer was a colonel who had faced off against the Axis powers in some of the most dangerous aerial missions of World War II. In an industry that thrives on larger-than-life personalities, where publicity and scandal often overshadow substance, Stewart's dual identity stands out as an anomaly, a testament to just how rich and layered a single life can be. You can almost see him in your mind's eye, wearing a bomber jacket over that tall, lanky frame, looking out over a fog-shrouded airfield in England during the World War II, maybe pulling out a dog-eared letter from home, or recalling the Indiana main street he grew up on. Perhaps that dichotomy is the best way to understand Jimmy Stewart, a man who belonged to both the everyday folks of America and to the historical tapestry of a world at war, bridging the gap with grace, never losing sight of who he was beneath the uniforms and the costumes. That's why he endures as more than just a name on an old movie poster. There's a timelessness to his story. A gentle dreamer who found his way to Hollywood, soared to stardom, then answered the call to serve. He saw the worst of humanity in the bomb-scorched skies over Europe, came home carrying scars that would last a lifetime, and yet continued to shine goodness into roles that remain beloved. It's not a neatly wrapped package. His was a life full of contradictions, heartbreak, and joy. Still, it all merged into a legacy that resonates with authenticity. Maybe that's why people watch his films every Christmas season or marathon them during classic film festivals. They sense the truth behind the performance, and they can't help but be moved by it. In the modern hustle and bustle of quick social media fame and fleeting attention spans, Jimmy Stewart's quiet, unwavering presence feels like a gentle anchor, a reminder that you can be both strong and vulnerable, that you can strive for excellence in multiple arenas, and that decency doesn't have to disappear in the face of adversity. In an industry that can be all about self-promotion, he showed that sometimes true greatness lies in understatement. In a world that can glamorize or trivialize war, he provided an example of service without spectacle. If you visit his grave, you'll see that final salute to the airmen he always considered himself to be above all else. But for the rest of us, we'll always have those film reels, those scenes where his earnest gaze and trembling voice reminded us of our own better angels. And if you look a little closer, you might catch a fleeting glimpse of a haunted pilot behind those eyes, a man who once soared into the unknown with only the faith that he and his crew could make it back in one piece. That's a wrap for today's video. If you enjoyed it, smash that like button, drop us a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss our new content. Thanks for watching,